This will be the most corrupt election in the history of our country.
Welcome to The Real News. I'm Jessel Noor. On October 22nd, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are scheduled to square off for the third and final presidential candidates debate. Trump is reportedly unhappy about changes to the debate format and has signaled he may back out. The Commission for Presidential Debates has said any candidate who interrupts or talks over their opponent will be muted. A change made after the first presidential debate was widely panned for being nearly unwatchable due to constant interruptions by Trump.
You've already fired most of them because they did a good job.
Some people don't do a good job. With you,
go ahead. Wait a minute. You get the final word, Mr.
Well, it's hard to get any word in with this clown. Excuse me.
Hey, let me just say to you.
No. I'm Mr. President.
$3.5 million, Joe.
The second debate was canceled after Trump became infected with COVID-19. A sick Trump refused to participate virtually, and instead he took part in his own town hall hosted by NBC News, which aired at the same time as Biden's town hall on ABC. Trump's town hall was viewed by a little over 13 million people, while Biden's was viewed by a little over 14 million. As we have covered on The Real News, the presidential and vice presidential debates thus far have not been really newsworthy for their content, but rather what they've excluded in meaningful conversations around topics like the Green New Deal, racial justice, and climate change. Meanwhile, Trump continues to campaign in battleground states, boasting about ignoring scientific evidence, pushing conspiracy theories, and promising a cure for COVID-19.
If I listened totally to the scientists, we would right now have a country that would be in a massive depression. Instead of, we're like a rocket ship. Take a look at the numbers. The pandemic is rounding the turn. It's rounding, and we have the vaccines coming, and they go crazy, the fake news. But I will tell you, it's rounding the turn with or without. It's rounding the turn. You'll see that. Normal life, that's all we want. We want normal life.
We have vaccines coming, and they go crazy, the fake news. Well, fake news is the topic we're going to be discussing with our next guest, Nolan Higdon, author of the new book, The Anatomy of Fake News, A Critical News Literacy Education. Thank you for joining us, Nolan.
Thank you for having me.
So what are you looking forward to in this final presidential debate, assuming this happens, and how can the public prepare themselves for this occurrence?
Well, to be quite honest, when it comes to the debate, the thing I'm most looking forward to is for it to be over. And the reason for that is the same sort of advice I would give the public, is to remember that although we call it a debate, these televised presidential debates, at least, have never really been debates. Debates, typically, you introduce your claim or evidence, and the other person restates it to make sure they understood you correctly, and then they dismantle it, disagree, or whatever. We've never really had that in U.S. television debates. They've always been sort of personality contests, and to a degree, I mean, that's why Trump did so well in 2016. Whether you love him or hate him, he has a sensationalistic aura to him, much more so than Hillary Clinton, who was kind of more like wonkish, typical bureaucrat politician type. So Trump served well by what we consider a debate, but I think the important thing for American citizens to remember is that these aren't actually debates. And I think the first contest between Joe Biden and Donald Trump really demonstrated that, as the two were trying to yell at each other and talk over each other, and Biden told them to shut up. And again, that may make people feel good that like their side is defeating the other side or whatever, but there's no real policy discussion in there, or disagreement that's of value to voters. So I'm more or less just kind of looking for it to be over in that sense.
So we mentioned how we've talked about how the debates have narrowed the conversations and solutions to some of the greatest threats we face. How does what the media excludes from what is talked about feed into this rise of the fake news?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. One of the biggest misconceptions is that Donald Trump entered politics and he single-handedly led people to stop trusting the press. And that's simply just false. For over 40 years, there's been an erosion of faith in the press in this country. Partially by politicians such as Richard Nixon, referring to them as the liberal media, which was meant to be pejorative. Fox News, which tried to say that it offered, true news and everybody else was lying. But the press also helped destroy itself in the sense that it had these like cataclysmic failures of reporting, like the 2003 invasion of Iraq, financial reporting up until the Great Recession, and even a lot of the political discourse around 2016 election. So in that sense, the press has really kind of built its own coffin in this country. When I say the press, I mean in particular the corporate press. The average person may not know exactly what is missing or exactly why the press is inaccurate or misleading, but generally people have a sense that when they sit down in front of 24-hour news networks or open up some of the popular papers, that something is amiss between what they're being told and what is happening in their actual lives. And a big reason for that is, at least in my estimation, is that a lot of the media centers are in big cities like New York City, of course, and they've cut their bureaus in like smaller cities and smaller markets and overseas. And so they don't really have a lot of connection to a lot of the folks they're reporting to. And I think it's in that disconnect where the best sort of fake news producers can create content that speaks to those people who feel left out or recognize that something wrong and kind of prey on that skepticism in a way. And Donald Trump at some level was a genius of that he was able to discount accurate reporting and make people feel like that he was like comforting them or speaking to them in that sense.
One of the things that we've talked to you before about, and you talk about it in your book, is the impact of not only media consolidation, but the commodification of media, and especially social media. And so now the big tech companies are cracking down on conspiracy theory movements like QAnon, but the cat might already have gotten out of the bag. It's the theory that falsely claims Democrats are part of a global child molestation ring and Trump is trying to stop them. These conspiracy theories have spread like wildfire in social media. It's gained, a huge following. Something like 27 QAnon followers or people that have expressed support for them will appear on the November ballot, and some of them, appear headed to Capitol Hill next year.
Yeah, if you, it's important to note that these types of conspiracies are nothing new, right? You can go back and look at like some of the things the John Birch Society was saying, which is a conservative organization in the middle of the 20th century, and it's on par with like QAnon type conspiracies. But you're right to point that the internet has been a game changer in the sense that now this information can reach audiences faster and much further away than previously possible. So in that sense, I think the internet has really changed things. And we also know from studies that false content travels much more, reaches many more audiences on the internet than true content. And even when something's false, if you prove it wrong, still the false content continues to spread much faster to more people than the information that disproves it. But I understand tech companies claim that they're trying to solve this problem, but to me, it's kind of like, having like Budweiser solve like alcoholism or something, in the sense that these tech platforms designed a lot of these problems. They created these platforms that are play to lower human emotions and get people to react immediately to content. And so it incentivizes people to create content that appeals to your emotions, where you can react quickly, rather than stuff that makes you think. And fake news is perfect for playing to those lower human emotions to get you to react. And also the way these platforms are designed, they give you the information that you're most likely to engage with, and not the information you need. So in that way, if you believe something that's false, they keep inundating you with that same false information over and over again. And we find that people conflate familiarity with veracity. So the more you're hit with something, the more likely you are to believe it. So when tech companies go in and they say they're going to solve this problem, for them, it's more about public relations issue That is that they don't want to be blamed for, the fall of democracy or whatever. And they definitely don't want government to get in and start regulating them. These industries have enjoyed a free, unfettered capitalist market since the late 1990s. So their primary goal is to give the illusion that they're solving the problem. But even if, let's just take that off the table and say that they were absolutely dedicated to solving the problem and they were totally doing everything they could to mitigate the influence of fake news, I think it's very clear that they do not have the resources or know-how to accomplish that goal. They're trying to use algorithms. It's this sort of techno-utopian notion that if we just use more technology, we'll eventually get to a good place. But these algorithms have already proven really problematic. Like certain terms that are hate in one language mean something else in a different language, and they're not able to recognize that. Sometimes science draws certain conclusions that are then changed by future studies. So you're not necessarily sending out false information. You're kind of sending out the science of the day, which then becomes, not the science of the day. All these kinds of like changes and subtleties in the way information flows really seem to be over the head of Silicon Valley. And furthermore, we've seen them really just kind of turn to the same like corporate journalists who have, again, I know in the book have made mistakes. They're turning to them as like the gatekeepers of information and trying to marginalize smaller press outlets. Sometimes that's good. You have, InfoWars and things like that, which are known for promoting false content. But some of these other smaller venues like Mint Press News and Counterpunch, they do good reporting and bring you perspectives that aren't in the corporate press, but they're getting marginalized by these tech companies. And I think for all those reasons, we have a seriously misplaced faith in these companies. I don't think they can necessarily do what they claim they're going to do. And furthermore, we live in a democracy. We don't have any democratic oversight over these companies. So I don't know if I feel comfortable letting them decide what is true versus what is false. And for those conservatives in the audience who are afraid of government regulation and censorship, let's be clear, these tech companies have contracts with the federal government. So this is effectively censorship by proxy in that sense.
So what we've talked about, is all extremely troubling. These, some of the most powerful corporations in the world control the media, control these tech companies, and we're really have to fight to stay one step ahead of this. And that's becoming harder and harder as they harvest more of our information and figure out exactly how we click and what will elicit responses from us. So you talk in your book, you talk about a 10-point process to save our democracy, the fake news detection kit. In which you lay out a number of solutions to this problem. We've gone into, these deep problems, but there's stuff we can do about it.
Yeah, I think one of the most basic things we can do is rediscover journalism and news. And I know that sounds really corny, but I think we spend a lot of time talking about fake news. We spend very little time talking about journalism. So before you even sort of get into examining what is fake news, I think it's good to remind yourself of what is journalism. And I talk about in the fake news detection kit that once you recognize what journalism is, it's easier to recognize what is not journalism, or in this case, what is fake news. I also encourage us to recast ourselves. Rather than be media consumers, be a media citizen. Remind yourself that the reason we have news, we access news, is not for entertainment, not to share, not to own the other side, but to be more informed participant in our democracy. And so in that context, when you're on social media, recognize social media for what it is. It's potentially an opportunity to access information. But also recognize, and as you point out with data collection, that when you're on social media, everything you do is working for free. You're giving up your data, you're sharing information, you're building things that this company is profiting from. So you're doing free labor. Perhaps if your goal is to strengthen our democracy, you might want to use that free labor toward something that could strengthen your community or strengthen our democracy. And then I also talk about the fake news detection kit that we need to get out of this McCarthyite sensibility where we make lists. where it's here's the good outlets, here's the bad outlets, only go to these ones, don't go to that one. The truth is, whether a news outlet is traditionally accurate or traditionally inaccurate, they can still have true and false stories in there. And it's up to us as the media citizen to look at each piece of content individually, see who the publisher is, see if they have a long history of producing fake news, look at who the author is, that is, who's the journalist or journalist, what's their history, and then look at the actual story. What is it they're trying to say happened? What sources do they have? Can these sources be verified? Are there multiple sources? And once we get that deep into the content, then we can start deciding for ourselves. What I argue in the text is, rather than have governments or corporations or even independent organizations telling people what is true or false, I really think we should transform our education system to have a critical media literacy education that focuses on news literacy, where we teach students not what to think, but how to analyze content for themselves so they can be autonomous media citizens and not dependent on lists or organizations and things like that.
All right. Well, Nolan Higdon, thank you so much for joining us. New book is The Anatomy of Fake News, a critical news literacy education. And if you missed, and so can you also tell our viewers a little bit about your documentary that we just had you on talking about as well?
For sure. The documentary is The United States of Distraction, Fighting the Fake News Invasion. And it was made in concert with students from multiple colleges and universities, working with experts and practitioners in the fields of journalism and media studies, to give a deep dive on how to recognize fake news, how to access legitimate journalism. And we've got some great folks in there from like Project Censor, Navi Martin, and Eleanor Goldfield and others. It's a really great documentary.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us on the Real News Network.
Thank you.